Okay, so inshallah, today we're starting a new week. We're starting a week 2 of section 2. We are in the deep when it comes to React. We're week 2 learning React. I'm sure you guys learned a lot about React and how to set up and the components and props and things like that. Today we're learning forms. Forms are really, really important when it comes to React, and they're also the most difficult part of managing React. They're not the most difficult to understand, but they're most difficult when managing it, especially when you have a website with a lot of forms and authentications and things like that. So today we're going to cover the first part of forms, and then we're going to do more forms. So if you go to day 2, you see that we have advanced forms. So here we're going to cover how to manage, how to use packages. We're going to use a different type of package. We're going to use one package. And also, we're going to have a lot more understanding of how to manage forms. But today we're going to get acquainted with what is forms. And you guys learned in HTML how to set up forms. So we're going to visit that and then go right directly to how React manages forms. So at the end of today, you'll be able to demonstrate how to build a form with the basic HTML form elements. You'll be able to use an on-change handler to capture and input values. You'll be able to utilize forms submit event to work with the form data. You'll be able to demonstrate the ability to handle multiple inputs in a form, and you'll be able to use controlled inputs to manage form data. So we're going to do all that. So before I get into the lesson for the lesson we prepared today, let's just go to MDN and look at HTML form input types. Let's look at that because they're essential when it comes to understanding what forms are and what they stand for. Okay, so let's see. Is this the one I was looking for? No. Let me see. So let me put MDN input types. Okay, I think it's this one. Yeah, so this one. So as you guys know already, when creating forms, you have something called input, and the input is this box, this just basic box. But we have input types. So this is the only required element when it comes to creating a form. All this is stuff that you see here are optional. They're optional, but some of them are also important. For example, like the name is really important. So the types, we have a lot of types. And if you go down, you see all these types, this whole list of types. It's a really long list. They have a few of them here, but you could also, let's see, yeah. So there's a long list here. And some of the types that we're going to focus are, for example, text, of course. We're going to focus on text. We're going to focus on password. We're going to focus on, I'm just looking for something. Let me see. We're going to focus on text, password, number, things like that. So for example, here are like a lot of them. There's the color one. That's an interesting one. We're gonna also maybe try checkbox, but we might not do it today. The color one is interesting because it's actually a new one. For example, here, when you change it to color, right? So HTML5 has automatically added a color for you. So you could just choose color. It gives you the RGB name for it, and you can move it around. So that is, we never had that before. For example, like a couple of years ago, we never had that. There's a date. So if you change this type to date, it's going to give you a date input, and you could click it here. And as you can see here, this before actually like a year or two ago, you have to use like JavaScript to generate this. So you have to use JavaScript to make it so that you click it and it gives you the date and all that stuff. Either JavaScript, or you have to use jQuery, which is a JavaScript framework, or you have to figure something out how to do. And there's also other other systems that help you with this. There's you know, a lot of them. There's a one that called Moment. Moment is also a framework, but the main thing is right now HTML5 added a lot of capabilities out of the box. You could also have a date with a time, the local time. You have email. It doesn't allow you to do anything to type other than email. So now if we do that and we type this, it's going to give you error if you try to submit that. You have to do something like this and then put the email. Also, this is limited. I don't know why it's max min width max. It's 8, so it should be something like 20. And the size should be like 50 or something, not 50. So it should be 20. Okay, so yeah, so there is a lot of inputs here. There's a number, there's a month, a password. So password, most of you know about it. So if you change this to password, all of a sudden when you type something, it's just dots, right? You don't see that. So that's for security purpose that HTML5 added. Number, of course, it doesn't allow you to add anything other than number. If you change this to a number, so now if you type I'm typing words, it's not allowing me to type letters, and numbers are fine. So there's a lot of them here, and the text, of course, is the main one that most people know. And there's a submit one. Submit one, when you change the input to submit, it's going to change it to a button. Okay, so automatically like that. So that's the general idea of what inputs are and how important they are to especially security, especially submitting forms. So let's start a new sandbox, new code sandbox, and we're gonna make it look nicer. So so I have this sandbox. I have to add a couple of things, especially styling and things like that that I have set up already. So I'm gonna change this styling to a CSS that I already set up. It's gonna show like that. And then I'm going to add one more file here. I'm gonna call it data.js. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna create a form, and then it's gonna create a list of notes basically. So that form is gonna have a title, and it's gonna have also it's gonna have a title and body. And title, you could put the node title, and then the body, the text, and then you submit it, and then it's gonna show a note card at the bottom. So so that's what we're gonna do today. So the data I'm gonna add this data here. It's a basic input. So this has a basically an ID. It has a title and a body. So that's what we're going to be creating, and the body is a string. So if we move it up here, it's a normal string. So this is our state basically. This is what we're going to be creating, and the form is going to submit that. So that's going to be our setup today. So the first thing we need to do is let's just clean up our app.js. And here I'm just gonna write, instead of this, I'm gonna write my notes. Okay, and that's it. So we're gonna create a couple other components. The main focus today is to have to show you how to create forms and how to submit forms. So I'm just gonna go ahead and create the other components. So I'm gonna create a folder. I'll call it components. And within here, I'll create a two components. One, I will call it nodes. So this will be the one that has our nodes, basically rendering our nodes. And the other one is the form, basically. So this would be, we're gonna say node form.js. So that will have the form set up for us. Okay. So if we go back to app.js right here, we need a couple of things. Let's actually import React from React. Okay, and here we need to set up a basic state for our app. But before we do that, we need to import. Let me just zoom in for a second. We need to import our data, right? Because we need to set our state, the data to our state. So we're going to say import data from, and we're going to say data. Okay. So we have our data set up for us. So let's create a basic state. So we're going to say const. I don't want the names to be confused about things like that. So if later on the names are confused, like the props and also the notes, then we will be changing it. So just keep that in mind. So set notes. So this will keep our notes, and then we will import use state, and that will import automatically for us. And we'll set it to the data. We'll set it to the data, which is the data in here. All right. Then after that, all we need to do is we need to render our notes. We have notes here, so the first step to render them, and then after that, we're gonna create the form, and then we're gonna add more notes as we go. So let's do that. So let's set up the notes component, which is this one. So this is going to be a basic one. It's going to receive props from app.js, and it's going to render the notes for us. So let's do that. So I'll say import React from React. And if you're confused about anything as I go, just let me know, send me a message or something, or stop me there, and we can go back. And we're going to say function. We could also do a, so you guys are familiar with, we're going to do an arrow function. Okay, so let's do this. So an arrow function, you're going to start with a const, and then the function name. So this would be notes. So this is the component name. And then after that, we need props eventually. So we're going to say props here and the arrow, basically. Then after that, we're going to open it. So that arrow function is basically the same as saying function notes and then giving it props and then return. Okay, so in here, we're gonna have a div. We're gonna give a class to this div, but we'll wait for a minute while we set up this. So the props, okay, so props, we need to pass the props before we do anything. Let's actually just render this h2 note, let's say notes component. So we can see, I always check if the component is rendering. Otherwise, there's no point of bringing data if your component is actually not rendering. So that's always important. Export default notes. All right, save that, and app.js. All we need to do is we need to render it here. So we're going to say notes, and it's going to automatically import for us like that. And we're just going to close it. As you can see, it's rendered notes component. So that's good. So we have our component rendered. Now I'm just going to add a couple of classes here. So I'm just going to add one class here, class name equal to let's say note list. Okay, so that's one class, and we will be adding more classes as we bring the data. So to bring the data, we just need to pass the state to this component. So if you guys remember, how do we do that? If we want to pass it, if we want to pass the state to the notes component using props.
Notes equals curly brackets notes.
Yes, so we're going to say notes equal curly brackets notes. So this notes is just a name that we created. This is it doesn't have to be a notes, and then this notes is the state, right? You can name whatever you want. In my notes, I named it, yeah, I named it notes. So notes equal to curly bracket notes. This is how you pass a prop to another component. So now if we save it, nothing happens because we're not rendering anything here. So now we're going to replace this h1 with, before we do that, let's actually console log the props so we can see exactly if we're getting our data. So save that, open the console log, and as you can see at the bottom, the last one is giving us an array, one array, and the name of the array is nodes, and then it's giving us an object, and the object is, let's see, the object, it was one object, so it has data, the data from here, from the data file. Okay, so that's good. So that's what we're looking for basically. I don't know why this does all the time like that. That's what we're looking for basically. So let us let's map over that data so that we can show it here. So all we need to do is we need to map over it. Okay, so mapping over it is basically saying grabbing the props, right? Grabbing the props. So we're going to say props dot nodes. You could also destructure this if you want. So that's also optional. So what you could do is you could say const nodes and then equal to props. That's the same as this. It's the same thing. So we're just not going to use that for now because we don't need it that much. So we're going to say map, and we're going to do our usual stuff. And here we're going to say a node, one node. So one node. So this one node, what we could do is let's actually use a arrow function. So we're going to practice our arrow function. And we're going to say here that usually what I taught you guys is to put this into another component, something like node cards. But just for today, we're just going to not use the card, another component. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to render it like that. So now if we put it like this, we put it, have this straight brackets, then we can render, I think we need two straight brackets here. So this is the one, we need another one here. So we need two. Okay. So in here we can render JSX. So let's render div. Let's give it a class name of node. And also, so we'll keep that. We'll just give it a class name of nodes and then close the div. Inside here, we are going to render the title, and right underneath it, we're gonna render the body. Okay, so let's do that. So we're gonna say here title, we're gonna say h2, and also I'll give it a class name, and these class names are in the styles. So it's something I already created for you. So we're gonna give it a title, and also close it and close that h2. But inside it, we need to put, did I miss something here? Inside it, we need to put the title. So we're going to say node.title. Okay, so now if we look at our, as you can see, we have our first thing rendered for us. And then right next to it, we're just going to give it a p paragraph and also give it the body here. So all we have to do is node.body. We're not trying to complicate it. We're trying to make it simple. Okay. So now the rendering is done. This is our node, and we need to add a form so that we can render more. So the main focus was not to render the nodes. The main focus was to render to start a form. Okay, so we have this. Any questions so far about how I set this up? The data is from here. So the information that's shown here is from here. And then we import it in app.js. We set it to the state. So this is the data. We set it to state. We created a new component called nodes, and we imported it here. and then we send the state to that component by using props. So this is props. And then if we go there, it shows props here. And then after that, we mapped over the props and then rendered title and body. So hopefully that makes sense. Any questions? Okay. So we're having like a couple of issues here. One of the issue is we need to give, I'm not sure what these are. It's coming from line 8. Okay, that's fine. We need to give the the key here. So each component that renders, React needs to know if it has a unique key, so it can render uniquely. So that's why we usually have a key here. So we can say something like key. So this is a whole component, a whole thing that renders in the UI. So it needs to have a unique identifier, basically. So here we're going to say move node.id. Since we had the ID here, we can use this ID. Okay, so property all this stuff. I don't know where these errors come from, but we'll figure it out. Okay, I don't even know how to clear this thing. Okay, so we have that. Now the next thing is to create the form. So we just need to create the form and then render it. So let's get started with the form. So the form, we're going to start with the basic form. So let's import React. Yeah, so we're still going to be using an arrow function. So we're going to say constant, and then we're going to use the component name, which is node form. Here, so node form is going to have a prop. Props. I mean, we don't have to have the props, but we're going to be bringing in another function from the app.js, so we might as well keep it for now. All right, and then return our JSX. So my usual thing, double check that we have something rendering. This, and then here h2 form here, h2, h3. I mean, okay, and then export, because it will not work if we don't export. Default node form. All right. So now it's not going to show anything anywhere. So let's put it in app.js here. So we're going to put it right here. Node form, and then just close it like that. All right. So form here. So that's what we wanted. Okay. So now the form, we can get started and create a basic form without any functionality or anything. So to do that, first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to make all this the form. So we don't need that div. So I'm going to say here form, and I'm going to close a form here, because this whole component is a form. So we don't need to have a div. In here, we're going to create about 2 inputs. So before we create an input, it's always good to have like a label for input. So we're going to say label. You don't have to have the label all the time, but it's good to have a label. And this is going to be the title input. So label, and then here basic input. So input, I'm going to give it a type, which is the only required thing. I'm going to give it a text, and then maybe a placeholder. Placeholder is it's just a small text before you click the form, a small text to show. And then I'm just going to call it title. So let's just close this one. So that's going to be, as you can see, we have a basic form input. It's pretty nice, huh? So we can put here something like, let's say something like enter title. Okay. So that's pretty cool. We don't have any button or anything, but it's already set up for us. The next thing is we need to create. So before we move on, let me just talk about a little bit about the label. So as I talked about, there's something called HTML4. So input label HTML4 4. So this thing is used to basically identify the input. I don't know why it's not giving us more information here. So yeah, so it has, what is it? Label. This is, it says for here, but in JavaScript it should say HTML4, because in JavaScript if you say for, it's gonna think it's like a for loop or something like that, because JavaScript is not only JavaScript, but React is basically a JavaScript. So to avoid that, they just called it HTML. They called it HTML4, and then you give it a title. Okay, so what does this do? Basically, what is it for? It's for, generally it's for devices. It's for crawlers. Crawlers are a little robots that come from like Google or something, and they check your website. So it's just for them to know that this label is designed for this input. So if you have a lot of inputs, then you know which input belongs to, which label belongs to which input. So now you just say for cheese, and then here you give it ID cheese, right? So those are two connected things. So that's what we're gonna do. It's usually just a good practice to have this in your code. And the for is capital F. So here we're gonna say just title, and give here a ID, and we're gonna call it title. It's a good practice to have that. All right. So the next input, let's go for the next input. We're gonna give it a label. I'm gonna give it for, let's see, HTML4. I'm used to writing for, so every time. And this is gonna be body. Let's call it body. And here it's gonna be a label. Let's create another input. So this input is gonna be a little bit different. It's not gonna be a text. This is gonna be a text area. So we're not gonna actually say input. We're gonna say text area. And HTML already knows what that is. Text area is a box where you can write more text other than just one line text. So, and here we're just gonna give it a, let's give it ID of body and a placeholder of, we're gonna call it add your notes here. All right, and close it. Okay, so as you can see, this one is a little bit different than this one. This one is one line. It doesn't matter how long, how far, it doesn't matter how long you keep writing. I don't know why my keyboard is acting up. It's going to be one line. This one, you type it more, it's just going to go to the next line. So it's like a little box. And also you can make it bigger like that. So that's pretty cool. And let me just make this toggle so I don't have to scroll. So we have two inputs now, and that's what we needed. But we need a lot more in there, especially when it comes to React. But before we do that, let's just give it the button before we move on. So let's give it a button, and let's give it a type of submit. And then, and this type submit is important in React, because that's how it identifies how to submit the form. Okay, and then button. So as you can see, it's the button is good. So add note, it's pretty wild here. When it changes the color, I should have changed that. But as you can see now, it's all good. If I type something here and type something here and I submit, the form just refreshes and it doesn't add anything. So that's not good. So we have to fix that. Any questions so far about the form?
The HTML form for the title, why is it going straight and then the body is kind of like
Which one?
I said the HTML4 to the title, it says just go straight, and then the body kind of makes it indented.
Okay.
Why is that?
The body indented. This one right here.
Yeah, I agree. When you write it, it just goes to the next line.
Oh, that's because
that's how
that's because I made this text area instead of input. So text area is another type of input, but it's different because it's designed for like a large number of text. So if I type a lot, it's just gonna like go to the next line, next line, next line. So it's gonna it's like an email. When you send an email, it's like the body of your email. But this one is just like your subject for like if you're writing an email. And you can limit how many inputs it takes, how many characters it takes here. And that's actually, it's gonna come later on, especially when you're writing a security stuff. You do not want to give the title or whatever, the name, unlimited characters. That's a security hazard, because let's say somebody just copies a whole code and pastes it here, and somehow something works and your application is hacked. So you do not want to do that. Also, there's a lot of things you need to do when it comes to forms. Forms are all the most difficult things when it comes to security, because imagine someone just coming here and saying, okay, so when I submit this form, it sends to their database. That means I can literally communicate with the database, and they could just write a code here, something like a script. They usually do this script, and then they will say something like they'll write a function here, and that function is going to take something blah blah, and then they will submit that, and they can communicate with the database, and all of a sudden your database is hacked, and that's how they get you information, or they delete everything or all that stuff. So it's a security risk. If you ever see a form, if it's not like protected or sanitized, it's always, they call it sanitized, because you have to make sure that what are you expecting from here, that's what you're getting. For example, you're expecting a text, and then you have to give it a limit. So let's say you're expecting about 20 characters of a text. If somebody puts some numbers here, then are you going to accept that? If they put something like blah blah, and then they put like something like that, and then blah blah, are you accepting that? So you have to make sure that you specifically say what you expect, and that's later on when you guys reach to like the back end, you need to sanitize your forms. But forms are very tricky when it comes to security, and I would say almost more than 50% of the hacks and the hacking things that happen in the world happen because somebody left a form in their website or in their application, and they didn't think about it. They didn't say, okay, I want to make sure this is a secure form. And actually, I was actually hacked through a form too, an application I own. It was a basic hacking. They didn't do anything, but it was I caught it before it became serious, and I realized how dangerous forms are. So I sanitized everything. So this is basic form. Let's move on and make it a React form. This is an HTML form now. This is a basic HTML form. There's nothing to it. There's nothing going on. If you want to submit it, you have to add something here. So in a normal HTML form, so let's say HTML form submit, usually you use something like PHP to submit. So PHP is a backend language. So let's see. So when you're trying to submit, there's a lot of things going on, as you can see here. And if we go to the form section, this is where the form, where we talked about like the form here. So we have this only now. Most of the time, you will see this method, post, action, all that stuff you see on websites. But React is a little bit different because React is a front end. It doesn't care about the back end, so it has to handle the information differently. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a state for the form. So every time we submit the form, we put that information into a state. So let's do that. So let's create that state to start with. And also it's going to be same as the state that we created on the other place. it's not going to be same. It's going to be similar. This one, I'm going to call it, I'm going to call it, I'm going to call it form note. So that this is coming from the form basically. Okay, and then set form note. So we're not confused about the other state. Use the state, import automatically. And then here we're gonna set to an empty object, but it's gonna have two values, which are the exact values that we have here. So it's gonna have the title and it's gonna have the body. And later on, we're gonna add the ID, but the ID is gonna be added on a different way, and I'll show you that. So let's do that. Let's create an object, and it's gonna have a title. The title is gonna be empty, and it's gonna have a body, and the body is gonna be empty. So that's a basic state with an empty values. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is there's two functions that we need to create. One function is every time we make a change here. So every time we change the input like that, we need a function to handle that. So we need a function that keeps track of every change that happens and then stores those changes for us. So those functions are usually called handle change. It's called, handle changes. Handle changes. That's their name. You don't have to name that. But in React, if you ever see handle changes, they handle the changes that happen to the form. So if you change anything in here. The other one we need to create is after we submit. So when we hit the submit button, right now, if you hit the submit button, what happens is this whole thing refreshes. And you know that React, we don't refresh anything. Everything happens in like instant and without refreshing. So we need to create a function that accepts the submit and then takes that data and adds it to the notes. So two functions. That's really important. And these functions are a little bit complicated, especially the handle change. So I would say, don't worry about understanding every aspect of it. Just make sure that you understand how it works in the general way, like the job of handle change. What is the job of handle change? And then later on, if you're creating another form, you don't actually have to recreate that handle change. You could just copy the one we did today, and then it's gonna work normally. Like it's gonna work fine. So the only change may be like one letter or two letters. One word or two words. So let's do that. Let's create the handle change first. So we're gonna say function. We could also use an arrow function. Let's just do that for the sake of practice. Handle change. This is how you write usually. It's a convention. It's not must. So keep that in mind. It's an arrow function. So, and also we're gonna add event here. Event is basically whatever happens. So we're passing whatever change happens in our form to this function. Okay, and here we're gonna make sure that we accept the input from here. So to do that, we need to do a couple of things. First thing is we need to grab the current state, so the state that our form is right now, and then we need to before we even do this, we need to add a couple of things here. So right now in this input we have the type, so we can move it to the next line if we want to, like that. Yeah, we can move it like that. And then we have the placeholder. So right here is placeholder. We have the title. No, not the title, the ID. We need to add value here, value. So the current value of our form. So we're going to say value, but the value is going to be equal to the state. So the state is going to be, we're going to set it to the title, the first one. So we're going to say, form, I think it's form note, which is our state, form note, dot title. That's the state for this one. So if we save now, and we go here and we change the, and let's call this, let's give this null for now. Yeah, so we don't even need it. We don't even need to put null here. I don't want it to give us error. So here, if we change, if we add something here, and title, if we put that, it's gonna go straight to the title. So the state is working with our form, with our input, the first input. The second thing we need to do is we need to pass this function. So before we even create it, we need to pass it, or we can pass it later when we finish with this form. The next thing we need to give it is a name. So we have to give our input a name. So this name is to identify exactly what this input is. What is this input? And this name works with the state. So when we're doing changes, we're basically saying, okay, grab the name the name we're changing, basically the value we're changing, and then set it to the state. So that's what the change is going to do. So let's do that. Let's create this form, this function. So at the end of this function, all it's going to do is it's going to send it the data that we change here to the state. So this is what it's going to do. It's going to do set form node, and then whatever changes we made. So we're going to create a variable, and we're going to call it new data or new input, or whatever you want. You could call it whatever you want. Let's put a new input. So that's going to be the new input that we created here in our form. So let's create that variable. Let's call it new input equal to. So when we say equal to, here is where it gets a little complicated and it's hard to explain it. But once you get it, you'll get it. But before that, you have to trust it works. And we're using something called a spread operator. So let me just show you first, and then we can explain what the spread operator is. So 3 dots, and then form node. So our state form node. So our state. That means just copy the state. So if you see 3 dots, it means copy, and it's called a spread operator. So the spread operator in JavaScript. And you don't need to know a lot about the spread operator, but it's important to use sometimes. As you can see here, it's 3 dots, allows an iterable such as an array expression or a string to be expanded in places where 0 or more arguments, something like that. But all it does is just, you have an array, list of an array, and then all you're doing is, now here's what it's doing, is it's spreading it out. So it's adding it together. So you're grabbing all of them one by one, and it's adding them all together. That's one way to use it. Let's see, what's the other way? Copying medium, maybe they're gonna say you have to pay for something like that. The other way is to copy the elements, basically. Whatever you have, an array, an object, is to copy it. So as you can see here, we have two variables, 2 objects. One is hello, another one is world. And all we did was here, we created hello world, and we said hello, hello, that is spread operator, and then world, that's a spread operator. And all it did was it added together both of them. So yeah, so keep in mind that spread operators are just copying the state. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is, here's where you just need to just copy if you don't understand. The next thing we need to do is we need to do event.target.name, and it's going to be set to event.target.value. I'll explain what this is about. Okay, so we said copy the state. Remember that in React, we cannot change the state. We cannot mutate it. We cannot mutate or change the state. So all we're doing now is we're grabbing the state and we're basically saying, okay, we have a new state. So this is a new state that we're changing it to, basically. So what this is doing is it's saying event. Event target is whatever we're doing here. So if we're making any changes here, so right now if I'm writing here something, it's not going to write anything now because we kind of like stopped it from writing. But if we do here, the event dot target is what I'm doing here. So event dot target is the text I'm writing. That's event dot target. And basically the element that I'm changing is called event dot target. So here we're saying event dot target, basically the element that we're making changes to, that name. So grab the name of that element. So if it's this one, it's title. If it's the other one, it's the body. We're going to create that one too. Then we're saying set that to event.target, the same element that we're using, that value, the value of that, which is this. So, and the value is going to be whatever we write in here. It's going to be the value. So we're basically, this is basically saying, as an example, let me just example. It's basically saying something like, we're saying something like we're saying title is equal to, we're saying event dot target dot value. We're basically saying that. And but the reason why we don't take title is because, for example, if you have multiple inputs, if you have many inputs, then you have to write also the body. And there's going to be fragments of your state. That's going to be, it's going to confuse the state basically. And it has a value. If you have another input, you have to create another one. So you're going to have a lot of these if you have, let's say, maybe like 20 inputs. And also, you could also create a handle for each one of them. So you could create a different function for each one of them. But if you have about 20 of them, then you're going to create 20 functions. And that's not efficient and that's not dry coding. So all we did was we made it dynamic. We said, whatever we're targeting, whatever we're working on, grab the name of it, and then set this to the value. So the name is going to be always same as the state. So it's going to be same as state, and the value is going to go in here. So that's where it's going to go. So now all we need to do is we just need to pass this function to our input. So we're going to say here, we're going to call it handle change or onChange. I mean, not onChange. So anytime it changes, anytime this input changes, fire this function. So fire handle change. That's what we're saying. So anytime we make any changes, even a letter or a dot to this input, run this function. And that's what it's going to do. When this function runs, all it's going to do is it's going to take whatever you type in, which is this, and then it's going to set it to the state, right? That's all it's going to do. So hopefully this works. So this types, that's fine. But let's console log a couple of things. Let's console log the first thing we're going to console log is the new input. So we want to see what the new input is actually bringing in. New input. Save that. Open the console. Clear it. And then let's type something. Okay, let's type Mohammed. Mohammed, as you can see, it's grabbing each letter. Every time you type something, it's gonna grab, and it's keeping record of that. And also the name is title. We didn't put anywhere here a title, but it knows that the name, the event.target that name is title. So that's what it's trying to give us. And also the same as the state right here. And then also if we console log the state, console log, let's call it state here. Form note. Okay, and let's get rid of this one for now, just for sake of cleaning things up. Let's call this empty. As you can see, the state is automatically updating. So it's saying, okay, so title is A, it's B, and then this handle change is basically sending each letter. it's like a snitch basically. It's a snitch. It's every time you make a change, it's like, hey, oh, he made a letter A. Even if we add a dot, it says, oh, he made a dot. Okay, here's a dot, and then it sends to the state. Oh, and then it keeps doing that. So let me kind of like reiterate this. This is essentially the most important part of today. So what are we doing is there's a function here. Let me undo that. How do you undo that? Yeah, right there. So essentially there's a function here. This function handle changes is handling our input, handling everything we input here. And then what it's doing is it's grabbing the state, which is form node right here. It's doing a spread operator, which is basically copy the state. We're not changing the state, we're copying it. So we're copying it and then we're attaching the copy. So we're taking the copy and we're connecting it with event.target.name, which is event.target is, as I said, is what we're working on. So this input, and then .name is the name element of that input. And then it's setting that to, then again, event.target, which is this input, to the value, which is the value of this input. And then it's taking all that information and it's sending it to the state. So it's taking all that and then boop, and it's gonna send it to the state right there. And then this changes, the title changes, the body changes. So we're not working on the body yet. So that's what's gonna happen. Any questions so far?
What did you say about the value? How does?
Oh, the value is underneath. I didn't show you. So if I scroll down a little bit, you see that the value. So it's right here. So this is the value.
Okay. So there's a title.
What happens if you put the body as a name as well?
So if you put the body as a name, yeah, that's what we're gonna do. So this one we didn't work on it yet. So we're gonna set it up just like the other input. So we're gonna add a couple of things. We're gonna add the name, body. We're gonna add the value, which is the state. So we're gonna say it's gonna be form node dot body, and also it needs the so we need to add the function to the handle change.
Okay.
So we're gonna say on change. So on change basically means when it changes. Whenever this thing changes, call this function. So we're gonna call it. So we're gonna call it handle change, like that. So now, even the body works now, because we don't have to do two things at we don't have to do two things. It's basically already set up for us, and all we have to do now is if we clear this, and we're console logging the state. Now we have this. If we type here, this is the, as you can see here, it's keeping track of the body. This is the body. As you can see, it's keeping track of everything. So this function is doing all the work of basically keeping track of what the person is typing, and then keeping track of and also sending it to the state. So let me just write a note here. This function keeps track of what you type and sends it to the state. Okay, so that's important to understand. Any questions? So we still didn't do the submit, because right now we're only doing the input change, and this is how you handle in JavaScript any changes that happen. So we're not doing HTML, we're not in the DOM. Remember, this is not the DOM. We're sending all this stuff to the DOM. So we're out of HTML world, we're in React world. So I have to handle things in a different way, not the native way. So the native way of handling things is just like the thing that you saw, like this one. What is it? This is the native way of handling. So blah blah type stuff here. That's to be email, blah blah, and then mail submit, and okay, invalid URL. So here's where the invalidation happens. So let's say gibschool.com, submit, and then it refreshes when I submit. It's required. Yeah, it's right here. So it refreshes when I submit, and then that's how it sends. So we're preventing all that default behavior by using handle change to handle that.
Ma'an,
Ha.
where do you get the name and the title? Is that from the data, JS?
Which name and the title? Right here?
Yeah, those.
So usually inputs have a name. So any form input, either text area or input, they by default they have a name. So that's from HTML, and that means this is the name of this input. You don't have to have it by default, like if you're doing a basic input, but if you want to target it, if you want to make changes to this input and keep track of it, then it comes in handy using this name. But we could also use something else. We could use something like ID. But name is usually the exact name of, we have to make the name the exact name as the state, right? So yeah. And also like we could try ID too. So let's see, I never tried that. So let's see ID. And the ID is something we just added today, like this assignment. It's usually not in input. So let's see if it keeps track of that too. Let's see. And so yeah, the same thing. As you can see, it's the same thing. So name is the convention, but whatever you want to keep track of, like however you want to keep track of this input, you can do that. Okay. Any other questions? So now we did the handle change. The next step is to do the submit. So when we submit, it basically sends it to here. And also you have to create another function that actually sends the data. So the submit is to grab the data, and then sending it is another function. So we're going to create that function too. So I think we're halfway. So let's take a break, a 10-minute break, and then come back and then finish the submit and that function. And then I'm going to take questions, and also we can do practice if you guys want, if we have a time. Otherwise, we can end the day. So see you soon. Assalamu alaikum. Okay, let's get back to it. Let's finish it up. All right, so I hope you guys can hear me well. Okay. All right, so what are we gonna do now is we're gonna create the submit button, and then we're gonna practice it. We're just gonna see how it works, and then after that, we're gonna create the final function, which takes care of adding the note to the body. All right, so this function is called submit, and its job is to just basically submit. So let's submit the form. So let's say submit. Let's call it submit form. We're still using arrow function. So we're gonna put here same thing, event. So whatever happens in the form. So that's what we're gonna take and do something with it. So the next thing we need to do is we need to add the submit to the form. So this function. I used to see people used to add here in the submit button, but you could actually add it in here in the form. So all you have to do here is, all you have to do is you say on submit, and that is part of React. So if we say React on submit, let's see. So on submit right here. So we have a form here, and let's look for on submit. As you can see here, on submit is part of here. Let's see, let's look for explanation for it. I don't have explanation here. So apparently in React, on submit is supported event for forms. However, when I try to, okay, so this one is person who's asking a question. But in general, the form needs to have a on submit method, either here on the form or on the button. I used to see on the button, but recently all we doing is the form. So that's what I see as an example, the recent updates. But the main thing is just it takes the submit, takes whenever you submit, it takes all the information that you submitted and it sends it to this function. So you give it a function. So this function is submit form, and that's it. So now whatever comes from this form goes in here. So when you hit the submit button, it goes in here. So now what we could do is we also have to add something called, we learned this way back when we were doing JavaScript, prevent default. We have to add something called prevent default. And prevent default basically is a function that allows us to not reload the page. So prevent default method cancels the event if it's cancelable, meaning that the default action that belongs to the event will not occur. So in general, by default, the browser should refresh. Like as I show you guys here, the browser should refresh when you hit submit. So we wanna kind of like prevent that default behavior of the browser. So all we have to do here is we say prevent default. So we say event. So event dot, an event is basically the form, what's coming from the form. And then we say prevent default. And this is exactly how you write it. You have to write it like that, prevent default. So now what we could do is we could console log the data that's coming from. So we could say just event. And here we can get rid of other console logs if we have any. So I'll just say here, submit form as a name. So now if we save this and we write here something, so let's write cook. Let's cook food. All right, and we open the console log and we hit submit, the add button. It's gonna give us everything that we submitted. So if we move this up a little bit, as you can see, it's gonna give us all this information. Let's see, what are we looking for here? Target. So it's going to give us the target. As you can see here, it gives us the target, and then it gives us the input. So all the information that we're looking for. So it gives us the input, and then the input has a value of cook, and then the baddie has a baddie value of let's cook, right? So this is the value here. So it gave us everything we need, and also much more data. What we did, how we did it, all that stuff. As you can see here, bubbles true. Remember that we learned like event bubbling. If you guys ever remember that, event bubbling was a way that basically when we do events in JavaScript in the DOM, how events bubble. Like when you do add event listener, when you do that, how that basically, how are they related basically? So if you have multiple elements that are nested together, then if you create an event in the like the lowest one or the inner one, then that event is going to bubble, it's going to affect everything above it. So that's event bubbling. So event bubbling is true. That means this bubbles basically. Like if you have this form and you have another form on top of it, then this affects that upper form. Okay, so that's not something we're going to focus on today, but as you can see here, it says default prevented, which is true. That's what we did. We said prevent default, and it's true. So that's a lot of information, and all we need to do now is we need to send that data that we just grabbed to the. We need to send it to the state, and not only state. We need to send it to the data here. So we need to submit it basically. So to do that, we need a function, right? We need a function to grab the information that we just submitted and send it to the to this data. So, and also here we could just say we could grab the state here. So if you don't want all that information, you can just grab the state, and instead of event, you could just say state, save that, open here console. And if we clear it and we submit it again, you see that the state has title cook and the baddie let's cook food. All right, so that's what we're going to send. We're going to send the state. So that form, we're going to create it in app.js because we want that form to have one extra thing. So we needed to have the ID. Remember, the ID is something that we need to keep track of. So we don't have the ID now. So that form is going to be created right here in the index. It's going to create it in app.js. So let's keep going with our arrow function thing. And we're going to call this add note, add a new note, let's say. Add a new note. And that's the function name. And then it's going to take a note. Or we could just say this one is going to be new state. I don't know what to call it. I'll just say note. Okay, basically this is the note that we created, like the one we just created, the cook. That's the note. So in this function, we need to pass the note. We need to pass it to the state. We need to grab the state. We need to do a spread operator with the note, with the state, and then after that, we need to pass the new stuff. So the new stuff that we created. So what we're going to do is we're just going to do the same thing we did as the handle change. So when we were doing the handle change, we have the handle change. We created a variable, and then we said we use a spread operator to copy the state, and then this is the new stuff, and then we set that new stuff to the state. So we're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to set the state here. We're going to say set notes, which is this, and that's going to be passed to a variable we're going to create. So we're going to say new note here. So let's create that variable. Let new note equal to, we're going to say this new note is equal to an array, and this array is going to have it's gonna have the spread operator of the state. So it's gonna be notes, and then we're gonna add, that's a copy of the state. So we cannot directly change the state, so we have to copy it. So, and then we're gonna add to the new node, which is this. This is the new node. This is basically what we submitted from the form. So let's do that. Let's spread operator note. So that is the copy of what we submitted basically. And then we're gonna change one thing, which is the ID. So we're gonna add a new thing, which is the ID. So ID, we're gonna make it, we're gonna find something unique. So you could do different things. You could create different things. You could have like a random creator function here or something like that. But just for now, for the sake of simplicity, we're going to use date.now. Date.now is a method in JavaScript, and it creates a current date basically. Like right now, seconds and milliseconds. So it's always going to be unique because you're not going to have 2 milliseconds that are same, right? But before we do that, actually, we have to put this in a object. Sorry, we have to put this in our object because it's a new data right there. And after that, we're gonna so that's a new date. So all we did here is we grabbed the state, which is this. We said, okay, we have a new data for you. So let's add a new stuff to the state. We grab the new things that we submitted from the form. So whatever we submitted from the form, it's gonna go in here. So that's right here. So it's gonna go right here as a spread operator, basically as a copy. And then we said, okay, add one more thing before you submit it. So before you submit all this to the state, let's add one more thing, which is the ID. And the ID we said date.now, which is basically a JavaScript thing where it gives you the date, the number, all that stuff in like one number. So if we actually console log here, console log date now, we do that and we clear this, save this. As you can see, it gives you that. It's a unique number, and every time we call it, it's gonna be, I don't know how to run again. It's gonna be a different number, as you can see. So that comes in handy because it's like milliseconds, and it's never going to be. I wouldn't say never, but it's for sure it's not going to be same for small projects like this. If you're creating a whole application, there's actually a package called the Universal ID, something like that, Universal ID generator, and it generates a unique ID, and it's universal. Basically, it means there's no number that's the same in the world for that. The application. So that's different. So now all we need to do, actually, we don't need to do anything. All we need to do is when it comes to state, we're not doing anything. We only need to pass this function, the add new node, to the form, right? As a prop. So let's pass it. Let's call it the same name, add new node. So we pass in this function so that we can use it when we say submit form. So we say add new node here. And I'll take questions in a minute. So let me just make this work. So now all we need to do is we need to grab that form that function that we created right here, and we need to put it after when we do submit. So right here, after prevent default, instead of console logging this, we're just gonna do we're gonna say props because the function is being passed through props, and then we're going to say add new node, and then it's going to be a function, and all we need to pass is the current state, which is form node, right? We don't need this console log. So now everything is connected. Let me just test it, and then I'm going to take questions. So let's add one more thing. Let's say cook food, add, as you can see, perfect. So if we can add more too here, let's say shopping. Go shop. Add. If you go down, it added that too. So it's going to add all these, and I made it a little bit responsive so that when you make it smaller, it stacks up, and when you make it bigger, it goes like that. Okay, so that's working for us. Any questions so far about the submit, the function that we created here? Questions?
So what is the point of using data now?
So the point of using data now is, remember in here, the data, we have two things. We took care of these two things, the title and the body, but we didn't take care of the ID. And always when you have ID, you have to have something unique, right? So it has to be a number that increments or a number that is unique or something that's unique. So that's why we created this so that it creates a unique number for us as an ID.
So it's like a key.
It's like, yeah, it's like a key, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, how are you going to push the new data to the data.js?
So we're not going to do that. So right now that is, so it's not as that dynamic right now, the application. So data.js is really like a basic placeholder at the beginning. So this, we could actually get rid of this and just grab this object and basically paste it right here where we said data, right? Just paste there. So this is a starter point. Okay, it's giving us an issue because it's not a array. This is a starter point. So we don't even have to have it. So if we get rid of it, like if we get rid of the date right here, and we get rid of this, so we need to have an empty array here so we can loop through it. We still can have that. So there's nothing here now. So if we do something here, still gonna add it. So we don't really need the data. If you want to add the data somewhere, you need to have some type of API. If you want to send it to the backend and use, instead of a get, axios.get, you use axios.post, and then you send this data to the backend. There's also another way of like keeping this. When you refresh it, it's going to go away. There's another way of keeping it. It's called it's called a what is it? Let me just check it. It's called, we could actually check inspect, go to application, local storage. Yeah. So we can set it to the local storage, and then it will keep there. And every time you refresh it, it will not be gone. But it's only for your computer. So if you go to another computer, that data is gone. So as long as your browser is open and you don't clear your history and all that stuff, it's going to keep it. So there's different ways to keep it. But right now, we're just keeping it like artificial, basically. It's not, the data is not going anywhere, basically. It's just being rendered, and then when you refresh, it's gone. Right. Any other question?
Marlon, what about if you have a different type of data, like string or like objects, like what it says use state?
So right now, actually, we actually have an object. This is a object, right? Right here. This is an object, right? So let's say the object has a string. So the title itself is a string, but it's inside an object. But let's say you have a completely different data type. Let's say you have an array, right? Array, then you have to create a, usually when you have array, you will have something like a selection thing here. So remember, in normal forms, you have a selection here. I'm not sure if we have selection. We have a radio here. This is called radio. And when you have a selection, it's like a drop down. So if you have those, you could create an array for that. And then after that, you could put it in here. So it will be something like this. So it's when you have a baddie, you'll have something like this. Let's say categories or something like that. Categories, right? So we have categories, and then the categories will be an array. So here we're just gonna push different categories in here. So it's gonna be something like home, work, something like that, right? So it's gonna be like work, and these will be a drop down. So I don't want to confuse you guys with all the things going on. So we're not going to create a drop down, but you can have a drop down here, a drop down method in the form, and then it's going to have a list of all these things. And when the person chooses any of them, it's going to push it here. So you could do that too. And usually drop down, you could like actually already set it to the state, and then they could just pick one, you know. So instead of creating a brand new drop-downs are finite. They're not like something that you could randomly create, like the title, you could just name it whatever you want. But drop-down is something that you already defined. But yeah, so this is how you create a new data type. Let's say you want to make like a Boolean, which is another data type. You could say something like completed, and then have here a set to true. So the default will be true. No, the default will be false because the task is not done, or the note, whatever you're trying to do is not done. Then after that, you could just, you don't even have to put it in, you could put it in here as a dropdown. And then the person could choose that and say done and then submit. But usually you say done after, after you submit the notes and stuff. So yeah, you could submit different types of data types, as long as you put it in this object. If you put it outside this object, then it's better to create a new state for that. So instead of this state, you could create another state and use that state. So I hope that makes sense. Any question? Anything you're confused about, anything that doesn't make any sense to you? I'm sure like this handle change is very confusing. The submit form is a little bit confusing. And also I know that this definitely confusing, because it took me forever to like understand why do we need to do all this linking, all this stuff to basically add something to the state. But this is basically how you add stuff to the state. Because you don't want to change directly the state, you have to kind of like keep copying stuff, and that's how you add it. And this is not even necessary. We could add this by could just add it. We could just copy this and add it right here. So we don't even have to do all that work. So if you just say ID, set to date now, and save that, and also get rid of this. That hopefully will work too. So if we add something new, it adds. And how do we know the ID is added? We have to console log it. Let's console log the state. Notes. So let's name it. Maybe we have another one. Notes up here. Save that. Yeah. So right here is our data. And as you can see, automatically it adds the ID. So I didn't want it to confuse you guys. So this is simpler, I guess. This is this state. This is the current state here, and this is the new thing that comes from the form, right? And it's right here, basically. I hope I can open two things at the same time too. Let me open the form and maybe split, right? Okay, so I split here, and then okay, and then app, it's going to be opened here, and this is the function, right? This is the function that we add stuff to the state, and here is where here is where we run it. So let me draw something here. So you guys send me a notes. Zakria sent me something. Does it goes to backend or is goes to the okay.
I was talking about you said if you need to add data to your actual backend, I mean database, you need to have a API, right?
Yeah.
Like, and then you're gonna use the post method, right?
Yeah.
I thought you're gonna add I was gonna ask you if the data goes to the database or to the backend.
So usually you have multiple options. You could set a local server in your computer, just like we had like on the last assignment where you guys had. I set up a like basic small server in before your React application. You could set that and you could send the data there, but it's going to be also going to be temporary. So if you want something to be permanent, then you need a database. And database is like basically a computer that stores this information. So when you send it, it will basically take that information and put it in like a table. So it will say something like it will have a table called something like notes, and that table will have a column called title and column called body, another column ID, and then every time you send a new note, it will just store it there. And that will be something you guys are gonna learn later on, how to build all that stuff, how to build the database and all that setup, and then send the data from the front end, which is this, to the database using API, basically API. So that, but right now we're just focusing on like the form, how to submit a form, all that stuff, keeping it simple. So what was I doing? I was just showing you like this function goes to right here. It's right here. And whenever we say submit, it just grabs all the information we submitted right here. And then it goes back to the app.js. And then this is the information we submitted. And then it adds it to the state. So it kind of like is connected to the state. And then we change the state. So this is the state. And that's what you see when you see this. Right? Because who's rendering the state? Let me just ask you a question. Which component is rendering the state?
It's the same component.
This component of the app.js?
Yeah.
Okay. The app.js, so if it's rendering the state, remember the state is an object. So you have to loop through it, right? So I don't see any loop in here, any map or anything like that.
The node forms.
The node here. So this is a component, this component right here. And remember we created it at the beginning. So it's rendering, it's getting the props and it's rendering the nodes, all this, just like this here. So that's what it's doing here.
Okay, so do you see where you use a map to loop through? Can you not like use for each or other like React? I mean JavaScript to method is.
I think you could use for each. But I think for each it's gonna render. Let me see. We can try it for each. Yeah. So let's see.
For each, it won't modify the data. It'll give you the original data. I think that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, it has a drawback, and also it's not even rendering. I think. Let me see. So let's say for each React data render. Let's see. So this a person already asked that. You need to pass an array of elements JSX. The problem is that for each does not return anything. It returns undefined. So it's better to use map because map returns an array. Okay. So that's what that person is saying. Yeah, let's see for each. Let's see for each itself. JavaScript. So for each JavaScript. So for each is a method executes provides a function that once for each array element. It executes a provided function once for each array method. So now we have array here, and then we did for each, and then it console logs each one of them. But the thing is, I think it does not return a array, and that's what we're looking for. It needs to return an array.
Yeah, it says, but there it says it returns undefined.
Yep, returns undefined. Yeah. You could console log inside it. That's what we did here, but it does not return anything. Just undefined. So yeah, I think that's why. Why did I open that? That's why we don't use it that much in React. Yeah, map always works. Any other question? All right, I'll share this. Let's share this. And also let me go over the assignment. I'm thinking of changing something from the assignment, so don't fork it yet. I'll let you know how it goes. So this one is called Form Team Builder. You're going to be using the same thing that we just did. You're going to be building a form and then submitting it and then showing it in your UI, so in the browser. So this one is not set up for you, so you have to clone this and then say use the Create React app to create your application and then do your setup. So right here I gave you example of how to create that. MBX Create React app and then use Team Builder. You can ignore this. I think this is old version. And then just say npm start and then start from there. So the task is to render a list of team members from state. So that's your first step, a list of team members from your state. The next thing is to build a form to add a new member to the list of members. So whatever you have already, add new members. So you can like give them the name and everything. I gave you like a little bit of structure, like you could use name, email, and role. That will be their information. That will be the state. So whatever way you think. So here use the hook, use the state hook, blah blah, all that stuff, basically to render the state. And here's to build the form, create a component called form, build your markup, basically your JSX, create an input with a name, email, and role. So the three inputs with one name, email, and role. And then you decide which component is responsible for maintaining state. You could maintain the state of the form with inside the same component, or you could have another component that takes care of the state. Whatever way you could do exactly how we did it. So it's gonna be fine. Render the form component in app.js, and then the app component should hand down through props any callback needed for a form to add this job. So just like the form we did the add notes, you're just gonna say create a form called. You can create a function that says add team or add member team member, and that's it. So that's all you're gonna do. Make sure everything's clean and everything is working. Test your application, and let me know, inshallah. And also try to do it on time. Spend it tomorrow, as you know, the 4 hours, whenever that works for you, and then try to make it work. And I gave you the blueprint of how to do it, so this should be a little bit easier than what you did before. Any other question?
You said you're gonna are you gonna clone it or create a new file, like create a React new file?
So there's nothing here now. There's only the README file. So you need to create your own React. So you say npx create React app team builder. I'll just give you this command. So once you say clone, then
within the file, within the folder that we cloned.
Within the folder, yes.
Okay.
Within the folder,
how are you gonna mix two folders?
It will create a folder by itself. So it will create a folder called Team Builder. right? That's what, if you go back to the first few lectures, I showed how to create several times actually how to create a React application. All you have to run is this command, and then it will create a folder called Team Builder, and it will have all the components you need for the React to start. Any other question before we close out? And wait for me tonight for this one, and I'll let you know, inshallah, by tonight if it's done. I'm just going to do some of the instructions, make it a little more clear. Okay. All right, guys. I'll see you tomorrow if you have any questions. Otherwise, I'll see you the day after that, inshallah. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.